Welcome back. I would like to present the many angles through which Trump is hurting America's future productivity with short-sighted attacks on science and education. This is important because in the near future, what is important with our very high debt and that is going to be higher with Trump, with after Trump's big beautiful bill, and with interest rates probably is elevated, still high due to the uncertainty that still is plaguing the future. Remember that just recently Trump has threatened the European Union with 50% tariffs. And all after all the mayhem, his previous tariffs from Victory Day cost in the financial markets, specifically in the bond market, and still Trump doesn't seem to learn. So we could expect a high interest rate in the future with a higher debt. That is the recipe for a collapse, and yet the media is not highlighting this situation enough. So let let's address some considerations with respect to the effect of the attacks on science and education on productivity. Number one, the ones that come from the budget cuts and DOGE. Cuts to scientific research of NIH and the National Academy of Science level are the best known, but we also must mention cuts to Head Start, which with cuts to Title I, the benefits for underprivileged students will reduce the productivity and chances in life of the work of the labor force of the average man. So we have an attack at both levels, the top level which is research, and the lower level that is the productivity of the labor force. And yet we seem to be with exceptions like for instance the New York Times, we seem to see not enough attention to the economic effects of these cuts. It's not a matter of whether it is fashionable or not to support education. It is about what the effects of those cuts are going to have in the future. Number two, the retaliation against universities for political reasons. Retaliation against universities like Columbia and the better known case of Harvard's resistance that have included funding cuts, threats of cutting its tax exempted status, and knock obstacles for international students to recruit international students are among the tactics used by Trump to tame the educational institutions for reasons that has nothing to do with fraud and waste. Let's not forget that attacks to the Central European University by Orban has been an important part of his project to tame the Hungarian civil society and keep his tight on government. Number three, the attacks on foreign scientists and students. This administration has made it difficult for foreign scientists and students to come to the United States, what has created an opportunity which has been used by other countries to increase their own technological edge at the expense of the United States. Trump officials has even threatened Harvard with a foreign student ban. This not to mention the cuts that came from the time of Biden. Uh, against collaborations with Chinese scientists from which both countries benefited. So this is something on which media has been mostly absent, and on which we would like to see more the role of science communicators to explain the public why this is not about helping Four Eyes eggheads in with their scientific project, but it is a matter of helping the United States to keep their standard of living in the next decade. Number four, we have seen also the normalization of quack and scientific approaches. As science is churned, quack approaches are welcome and normalized, like in the case of the anti-vax movement and its effect on the surge or the outbreak of measles, or the take into account the position of the current Secretary of Health, Robert Kennedy Jr., on fluoridation of water, which unfortunately are not just private opinions, have been translating into actual policy. Unfortunately, since science communicators have not done a good job at countering the disinformation coming from the federal government itself, and because media has not welcomed them to help people connect the dots, this movement is being normalized before our own eyes. Number five, we have been neglecting investment in research and development, especially on nanoscience climate, which includes fusion, sequestration, artificial intelligence, and quantum and health and biotech technologies. As the geopolitical context makes it more difficult to get a smooth transition to renewables in the case of climate, sequestration and fusion should have been given more support. Unfortunately, the obstinacy of climate activists has made it more difficult to take this alternative path, as it's clear the original one has become unrealistic. On the other hand, big oil interests have taken advantage of this naive sophomoric stance by the left to push their own interests against renewables. And even beyond those big oil interests, the interests of the alt-right, consider the case of Texas, which is pretty much at the edge of renewables, and yet the incentives for renewables are being rolled back by the pressure of MAGA activists. Number six, another harmful issue is the cancellation of the collaboration on scientific research with other countries, especially on nanoscience, climate, which includes again fusion and sequestration, artificial intelligence, quantum, health, and biotech technologies, which is hurting the USA more than in this case it's hurting China. Short-sightedness has led to cut scientific ties with China without taking enough precautions to keep the edge over China on funding that research, because if you are going to cut ties with China and you also cut the funding for research, you are pretty much inviting China to take over. And it's not just the funding on research, and you can see that in the funding on research, in the number of peer review papers and other indicators mentioned recently by Farid Zakaria. Also mentioned also by Farid Zakaria in his book Age of Revolutions. And though the Inflation Reduction Act took positive steps to make American manufacturing more resilient, which is justified after the effect of Chinese obstinacy on using its own vaccine and the effects that had on the supply chains and the subsequent inflationary process, more funding for research is needed. And a way to compensate for budgetary restrictions are collaboration with other countries. Science should not be politicized by MAGA, and yet that's what we had even during the Biden administration. It was a heavy investment in research in the times of Kennedy, what made possible the significant productivity increases that gave America undisputed advantage in the 60s and 70s. As another example is ARPANET's investment in Internet, which gave advantages to America we didn't see until the late 90s and 2000s, but the effects on productivity are at this point undeniable. Yet we seem more eager to put money on pharaonic projects like the F-47 and Golden Dome instead of funding more needed research, even on military grounds, for instance, in the case of the applications of artificial intelligence to drones. Number 7, as mentioned at the beginning of this short, we are failing to plan for lower productivity in a future with higher debt and maybe more restricted trade and damaged trust in American institutions, not to mention the national security implications, may represent a few, and not to mention the effects of all this on interest rates. This may represent a future with lower wages and increased inequality. A compelling case for science must be made by Democrats and science communicators, and the media should echo that effort. A case that helps voters connect the dots between science and their own standards of living. So it's not a matter of science should not be presented as a matter of glamour, but always connecting the dots. So the average person supports this effort instead of seeing it as something completely disconnected to their own lives, which are paying rent or paying the mortgage at the end of the month. And having said that, let me leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news,
former President Biden convenes press conference to commemorate peace in Palestine. Former First Lady Jill Biden and her son Hunter register all rights over the ex-president as announcement of ticket Harris Biden 2028 is imminent. Former President Biden convoked a press conference to announce what he declared was the first achievement of his second term, peace in Palestine. Biden confirmed that, yesterday in my bedroom, Bibi and Hamas came to have milk and cookies and there, at my kitchen table, they signed the peace. Bibi is my friend. On the other hand, afraid that the Democratic Party might copyright Joe Biden's declarations, they hurried to file a registration of all rights over the former president at the Library of Congress. It's our right to use Joe in the upcoming elections, and the Democratic Party can't take that from us, declared the former First Lady, Rachel Zegler, to represent the main character. But the musical will change its name from Evita to Evicted. Producer Michael Harrison announced that Rachel Zegler will continue as the main character in the musical, but that the name will now be Evicted. Now it will be the story of a young empowered woman with verbal incontinence who is committed to freeing Palestine and is the victim of a curse. She destroys every production she is part of. And right after this musical, we may still try Evita as Rachel had envisioned it, declared the producer. Joel will return to The Last of Us in Season 3, announced HBO. After the backlash suffered by the series, very popular in its first season after Joel, the character interpreted by Pedro Pascal, was killed in the second episode of Season 2, HBO confirmed the return of the popular Joel Miller. An HBO executive said, off the record, that they were disappointed with the fans who, they believed, would prefer to see the series turn away from the cordyceps pandemic and focus on the romantic relationship between Ellie and Dina. For now, it seems we'll have to bring Joel back and all that violence on which modern audiences are not interested, so we are discussing whether to bring him back as a zombie, as a ghost, as his Republican twin brother, as Ellis's imaginary friend, or to pretend that nothing happened in episode 2 and bring him back just like that in season 3. Ohio man who was arrested after his car got trapped inside a car wash will be awarded $100,000 compensation. An Ohio man who got trapped in his getaway car inside a car wash and was arrested for shoplifting groceries in a local Giant will walk away with a $100,000 compensation. The man, whose name, at his lawyer's demand, was not revealed to not harm his reputation, declared that it was his sincerely held belief that the groceries were his and so there was no theft. Confronted with the Patriot defense, famous since it was invoked in the pardons granted by President Trump to the January 6 rioters, the district attorney had no alternative but to release the suspect and grant him the customary compensation, $100,000. The management of the Giant Eagle Grocery, located in South Euclid, protested the district attorney's decision, but the Lakewood Police Department was more understanding. They say they patriots now, and we on top have to give them $100,000. But if President Trump says so, I guess it's right. So the Attorney General only did what he had to do, declared the Lakewood sheriff at the moment of the suspect's release, who, at the moment of leaving the facilities wearing a MAGA hat, declared that he, like other beneficiaries of the Patriot defense, was also joining the Republican Party.
This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.